So I did my capstone project on land suitability analysis for wild pig and boar in San Benito County, California, using weighted raster sum. My name's Ian Patrick. My hypothesis was that you could use publicly available data to predict viable or suitable habitat for wild pig use, as here on the left, or false, you could not use the publicly available data using weighted sum to predict a viable habitat. So I used weighted sum, which was combining ranked rasters. As you see, you rank the rasters and then the software adds them all together, multiplies them together and applies the weights. I used a 10 by 10 meter cell size to standardize all of my data. County shape, I did not rasterize or use it ranked. It was just merely used as a mask to clip the other data to. I used ranked quadrangles, DEM elevation data, MODIS vegetation data, NHD national hydrography data, the water data, and transportation data as my inputs. So first I used the select county model to use the feature class to feature class tool and an SQL query to select out San Benito County. Any county could be selected using this, but that's the county I chose. Here is the county. As you can see, it kind of resembles a pig in shape, oddly enough, with the snout in the northwest and the legs kind of on the southwest here, and the ears up here. And that was my mask shape. So for rank quadrangles, I manually had to enter the ranks into a set of quads. Some of the steps I had to do manually. So I clipped out the entire state of California, clipped out the quads that intersected the county, then added the ranks manually to a field that I added. And then I used this model to rasterize the quads for use in the final model. The ranks here, as you can see, rank 1 through 5. 5 really was only down here in the corner. So the highest ranks, the 26 to 75, these are wild pigs harvested according to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. You can kind of see they kind of mostly follow this area, which is the Diablo mountain range along the coast of California. Down here is the Pacific Ocean, and up here is the valley. So my digital elevation model, there was 2 different geotiffs that covered the area. So I mosaic those together using the mosaic to new raster, and then clipped those with my county mask. And then for this project, I used aspect and slope. Some of the other projects that I had researched, like for instance, Anderson and Raza down here, they used hillshade for elevation ranges, because the rodents that they were studying in Venezuela only lived between like 1,100 and 1,400 feet elevation or something like that. So it could be used for a later analysis of a different type of species, but for pigs, aspect and slope was the only 2 important elevation data that I needed. So for slope data, as you can see, a lot of it's in the low range. There are a lot of areas. It's a little odd that it's hard to see, but the green kind of shows up a lot better than everything else, the low slope, but there is a lot of diversity in this area and really extreme terrain. Really in the northwest area this is the area around a town called Hollister, and it's really big farmland and everything, so it's really flat. Over here is grasslands, and as you drive in on I-5, Interstate 5, you can see that this is all grass in here. Aspect is important because as I have here, Park and Woo-Shin Lee, they studied a spot in Korea, and they determined that the eastern, southeastern, and north slopes were the most viable aspects for the wild pigs, because they do not sweat. They cannot survive in direct sunlight, so they would not want to be on a southwest or westerly slope, and I adjusted my ranks accordingly in my weighted sum. For the MODIS vegetation data, this was also in 2 geotiffs, but the satellite, their coverage overlapped. So I manually created an overlap area to use as a clip, and clipped out the first TIFF that had the least amount of coverage and merged those together into a new raster, and then clipped that raster to the county. And as you can see here, this is before it's standardized, before it was changed, projected into a 10 by 10 meter cell size. This is the 460, I believe, by 460 meters. So it's very blocky. And I originally used this in my my initial weighted sum, and it created kind of a blocky output, as you'll see later on, a very pixelated. I changed the symbology of the TIFF to match the stuff provided by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is where I got the data. And as you can see, a lot of the areas are savanna, grasslands, closed shrub, the stuff that the pigs would really prefer, shrublands, some savannas, but they kind of avoid these open areas, and the urban areas they won't really be in. The croplands they do like up here, but because of the surrounding areas having very little coverage, it didn't seem like it was going to be a very viable area for land suitability. The NHD, the hydrology data, was the most complex because I had three different data sets that covered it. So I had to, with the points and water bodies, I was able to merge all three together. But with the line data, it was so big that I had to clip it to the county before I started merging them, because otherwise it was going to be like way too much data. The next step was the feature class to feature class, and during that I selected out perennial water sources instead of intermittent, because the perennial seemed like it was more viable and a easier sample for what I needed to rank. And so I chose like springs and seeps, as you can see here. Rivers, I chose rivers and creeks that were there year round, so they're not intermittent. Then I rasterized all this vector data and created a new NHD raster with all of the points, lines, and polygons. So this map shows that the points are the springs and seeps. The dark purple lines are the streams and river bodies, and then the light blue areas are the streams and rivers, sorry, and the light blue areas are water bodies. And for the weighted sum, I just, as I discussed in the final weighted sum model, the Euclidean distance measures from the center of a cell of a polygon. So they weren't very large lakes, so I kind of just took that error. A lot of these are these little tiny ponds on people's properties. There's only like 2 large lakes, so I assumed that the error created by that was within reason for my uses. For transportation data, I used trails, roads, and railroads. I did not use the airport data, as there's only one small airport up in this area by Hollister, and it was surrounded by roads, so it wasn't really important. I merged all those together and then clipped those to the county, just like I did all the other data sets. And this shows the roads, and my ranks I based off of Loggins in 2007, his PhD dissertation. He did a habitat suitability for wild pigs in California, actually very similar to what I was doing, but didn't take as much of a GIS approach. He was using more of a statistical approach. But I used his distances from roads, like 0 to 200 meters was the lowest rank. middle rank was 200 to 1,000 meters, and then the best rank was 1,000 meters to 3.4 kilometers or 3,400 meters. So my final weighted sum model contained all of that, the outputs from all of those other models. So I have my slope and aspect for my elevation, my NHD data for the hydrology, transportation data, my ranked harvest quads, which is the hunter harvest. Sorry, I keep pushing the mouse. And the MODIS, the vegetation resample data. So for the transportation data, and that was the only one that was still a vector. So I projected it. Basically, I projected all the rasters and everything to make them all 10-meter cells at this point to standardize them, and then clipped them and for use, and used Euclidean distance for like the NHD data to get the distance from water and the distance from the transportation routes. I used that. Focal statistics I used on aspect and slope to get like the neighborhood of the measurements, and the aspect and slope to get a better understanding of the surrounding neighborhoods. And then I reclassified all of it to have ranks of 1 to 3, with 3 being the best, 2 being a medium rank, and then 1 being the lowest. So this is just an example of what I used. The distance to roads, like I said, was 0 to 200 meters was the lowest rank, and then the highest rank of 3. For the MODIS data over here, this is like the best ranking ones are the ones with coverage, like a closed shrubland, forest. This is savanna, I believe. Basically, all of them were medium to high if they had any kind of coverage. Grasslands was low, and then urban areas were also of the lower ranking. So as you can see here, this was before I had standardized a 10 by 10 meter. This is a 460 meter for the MODIS data. So it created a very cellular output, like a pixelated output. So I selected 3 places to go do field visits, and those 3. And I resampled it to 10 by 10 meter. And as you can see, it made it more of a smooth surface instead of so pixelated. And the area I went was down in this area. That was my field visit. And so my son and I went down, and the gates were locked. So it was going to be a 4-mile hike up to extreme terrain to get to 3 and 2. I was planning on driving to these so that it was only going to be like a mile hike in. But we observed this area. We did see some pig tracks and the trails that traverse. So they go directly uphill instead of side slope, like deer. Deer will tend to go along these side trails like this, where the pigs, from our observation point, you could see trails that went straight up the mountain. No wild pigs were observed, but the terrain was really good. And the vegetation and distance to water was correct. So overall, I do think it did predict the land suitability for wild pigs. And that is my conclusion for my capstone project. Thank you very much.